My name is Liam Harcourt, 70 years old, widow, stroke survivor, though survivor sounds a lot more heroic than what I feel most mornings. It's not bravery really, just stubbornness and the refusal to quit breathing until I'm good and ready. The stroke happened 2 months ago. A sudden blur in my right eye, my coffee cup slipping from my hand, the world tilting sideways. It was mild. The doctors said no paralysis, no major speech loss, just a slight drag in my leg, a stiffness in my fingers. You'll be fine in a few weeks, they promised. But fine is a relative thing when you've got 70 years in your bones. Ron, my only son, visited me in the hospital. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands shoved in his pockets, trying to look casual, but wearing that tight little smile people get when they've already made a decision about you. You can't stay alone, Dad. Come stay with us. We've got a room ready. I should have asked which room. They picked me up the day I was discharged. I remember thinking the drive to his place felt longer than usual. When we pulled into their driveway, Alice, my daughter-in-law, was standing on the porch with her arms folded. She didn't come down to greet me, just gave a brisk little wave, as if I were the postman dropping off a package. Ron opened the door to the garage. Not a converted space. Not even tidied up, just the garage. A thin mattress was laid directly on the concrete floor, with an old blanket folded neatly on top. The walls were bare studs in places, the smell of motor oil and damp cardboard thick in the air. My nightstand was a stack of old moving boxes labeled Christmas lights and baby clothes. A single space heater hummed in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the November cold. I know it's not perfect, Ron said, shifting from foot to foot, but it's temporary. Just until you're steady again. Temporary. That was the first lie. The first night, Alice brought me a plate of chicken and potatoes. She set it down on the stool near the door and left without a word, closing the door before I could thank her. I ate in silence, the sound of the heater ticking as it cycled on and off. Somewhere inside the house, I heard laughter and the faint clink of silverware on plates. The second night, Ron brought the food himself. He muttered, "Here you go, Dad," and disappeared before I could start a conversation. By the third night, they didn't even knock, just set the plate down and left it for me to find when I noticed the smell drifting in. I began to feel like a stray cat they fed out of obligation, not someone's father. The cold was constant. It crept in under the garage door and seeped up through the concrete floor. My hands ached in the mornings, and my breath fogged the air at night. I wore my coat to bed. Mice rustled in the boxes behind me, bold enough now to come out and sniff at the crumbs I swept into the bin. When I couldn't sleep, I thought about my old house. A small, warm place where the kettle was always on, and the walls held photographs of my late wife, Margaret, smiling in the garden. I'd sold it last year at Ron's suggestion, so I could move closer to him. That way we can see each other more, he'd said. I'd imagined Sunday lunches, helping with the grandkids' school projects, maybe even teaching my grandson how to fix up a bike. Instead, I got concrete floors and cold dinners eaten alone. It wasn't just the cold or the food or the mice. It was the silence. They never asked me to join them for meals. Never invited me into the living room to watch television. Once, I shuffled to the kitchen door while they were eating, thinking maybe I could pour myself a cup of tea, but the moment Alice saw me, she jumped up. "Don't worry, I'll bring it to you," she said, steering me gently but firmly back toward the garage. By the fifth night, I'd had enough. My back ached from the thin mattress. My knees were stiff from the damp. I woke every hour, coughing, and the sound echoed in the hollow garage like a reminder that I was in storage, just another old thing they didn't want in the house. I started to notice other things too. The way Ron avoided looking me in the eye. How Alice's voice tightened when she spoke to me, as if I were another chore to manage. How the grandkids barely spoke at all, their eyes fixed on their phones when they passed me on the way to school. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an obligation. And obligations are best kept out of sight. On the morning of the 6th day, I sat on the edge of the mattress, rubbing my hands together to get some feeling back. A pale winter light leaked under the garage door. My breath looked like smoke. I could hear Alice moving around in the kitchen, the scrape of a chair, the cheerful ping of her phone. I thought about all the times I'd worked double shifts to pay for Ron's schooling. The nights I'd walked home in the rain because I'd given him my bus fare for a school trip. The Saturdays I'd stood on the sidelines of his football games, cheering until my voice went hoarse. And now, after 70 years, this was what I'd been given in return: a damp garage and a plate of food at the door. My right hand trembled as I reached for my notebook, but not from weakness. My mind was clear, sharper than it had been in months. They might think I was too old to stand up for myself, but I hadn't survived this long by lying down and taking whatever was handed to me. That was the morning I began drafting the notice. Not for me, for them. The sixth night taught me more than the previous 5 combined. I was awake anyway. The heater had coughed itself into a sulk, and the damp had crept back up into my bones when the kitchen light clicked on. Voices drifted through the thin interior door the way cold finds a crack. Alice first. "It can't go on like this," she said, low and clipped, that tidy anger of hers. "Your father is a liability, Ron. If we want any of this to work, we need access. And frankly, his life can be accelerated. Naturally. You know what I mean." I stopped breathing. Accelerated. Ron whispered something I couldn't catch. The faucet ran. A drawer thumped. Then Alice again, brisk as a spreadsheet. I spoke to Marston about guardianship. If we document decline, we can file for temporary control. With temporary control comes his accounts. The proceeds from his old house are still sitting there. We could pay off the cards, sort the refinance, stop living under this pressure. So we just put him somewhere? Ron's voice sounded smaller than I remembered, the voice of a boy about to do something he knows is wrong. Not somewhere. A facility. People do it all the time. We can't keep serving him in the garage forever. If we drag this out, we risk him changing beneficiaries or worse, giving the money to charity. It's cruel to him not to take charge. Dad will never agree, Ron said. That's why we don't ask, Alice replied. We show concern. We document falls. We make it clear it's unsafe. Or we call Adult Protective Services on ourselves for advice. They'll tell us to seek guardianship. Either way, we move forward. This limbo is killing me. Silence. Then the soft, wet sound of a kiss. Trust me, she murmured. Soon it will be our home, clean and quiet. We'll have control. My hand was on the notebook before my anger had fully formed a shape. Accelerated, I wrote, the letters jagged. I underlined it twice, then 3 times, as if the ink itself could anchor me to something steadier than outrage. I didn't cry. The word didn't deserve tears. It deserved a plan. I took inventory of what I actually knew, like I used to in the workshop when a clock jammed and all the delicate anger in me couldn't move a single gear. They had no intention of moving me into a room. The garage wasn't an oversight, it was a holding pen. They believed I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be cared for. They wanted my money and possibly my signature, and they were willing to fabricate a narrative to get both. I was not helpless, and I was not alone. I simply hadn't told anyone what was happening. The last line startled me. Not alone? And yet, my phone buzzed in the blue hour before dawn, almost as if I'd conjured the idea by thinking it. Eva, my sister's girl, though calling a 40-year-old woman girl does her a disservice. She's a nurse practitioner with a soft laugh and a spine like rebar, the sort of person who memorizes medication schedules for fun. We talk every couple of weeks. I'd missed her last call. Uncle Liam? It's late, I know. I could hear car tires on wet streets, the hush of a night shift changing to morning. I was charting and suddenly had this awful feeling I needed to check on you. I looked at the door, at the line of light under it. I thought of my notebook with the word accelerated, still shining wetly on the page. I thought about how silence makes abusers brave. It's not a good time for pretending love, I said. So I'll tell you the truth. I told her about the garage and the food at the door and the mice. I told her about the dinners I wasn't invited to, the way Alice steered me back to my concrete square with an apologetic smile like a hotel concierge. And then I told her what I'd heard, word for word, careful with the quote because it mattered. Her life can be accelerated. I said it exactly as Alice had, with the same bland confidence. Even my whisper had edges. Eva didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long inhale at her end, and then her voice, stripped of comfort. "This is illegal." She said it simply, like a diagnosis you can't sweeten. "Illegal?" I asked, feeling the word land inside me like a handhold. "Several ways," she said. "Financial exploitation of an elder is illegal. Coercing you into guardianship? Illegal without evidence and due process. Neglecting you, feeding you in a garage, refusing reasonable warmth or accommodation could be elder neglect, also illegal." And the accelerated comment. Her voice went cold. "Don't sleep without your phone. Document everything." Today, I sat up straighter on the mattress. My breath didn't look like smoke anymore. "Here's what you're going to do," she went on, shifting into the cadence I'd heard her use with anxious families on the ward. "First, stop being quiet. Silence protects them, not you. Tell someone local, neighbor, pastor, doctor, me, everyone. Second, document. Photos of the garage, the mattress, the heater, the food on the stool, the mouse droppings. Time-stamped if you can. Third, lock your finances. Call your bank. Put a note on your accounts. No changes without you in person. If you've given Ron or Alice any access, revoke it. Fourth, your paperwork. Do you still have the house deed?" I smiled without meaning to. "Yes," Eva exhaled. "In your name?" "In the trust," I said. "My name is trustee. I never transferred it. When I sold my house, I used the bulk to buy this one under the Harcourt Family Trust. I let them think of it as theirs because I thought, well, you know what I thought." There was the briefest pause, then, "Good. Then you are their landlord, Uncle Liam. Not their dependent. That matters." I could almost hear her jaw set. "Fifth, call an attorney. I'll text you 2 names who specialize in elder law and landlord-tenant. If what you've told me is even half true, you can serve them with notice to vacate for cause. Sixth, if you feel unsafe, call me and call the police. Do not argue with them alone behind closed doors. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," I said, and felt something ease in my chest, the way a jammed spring slides back into its groove when the pressure is right. "Last thing," Eva said. "Eat a proper breakfast. A warm one. Not what they shove at you. Boil water in the garage if you have to. You don't make good decisions when you're cold and hungry." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap and the garage around me. The thin mattress, the boxes, the draft. Nothing had changed and everything had. The same cold, a different weather inside me. I stood slowly, because the leg still drags when I'm careless, and went to work. Documentation first. I took photos of the mattress, the heater with its little orange light and its plug threaded through a tangle of extension cords. I photographed the line of wet under the garage door, the mouse pellets in the corner, the plate on the stool with last night's congealed gravy stuck like lacquer. I opened the door and photographed the threshold. Inside, concrete. Outside, the cheerful tile of their kitchen. It felt like photographing a border. I took a picture of the notebook, too, the word accelerated underlined 3 times. Not because it proved anything, but because it reminded me of the moment I changed my mind about myself. Next, the bank. I called the branch where Clara still worked, Clara of the relentless holiday sweaters, who once slipped Margaret and me an extra booklet of checks when we were short on gas. I told her I needed a flag on my accounts. She told me to come in with ID. "Don't send anyone in your place," she said. "We've got some scams with caregivers." "They're not my caregivers," I said, and she said gently, "All the more reason." I dressed in the garage, which felt like dignity practiced out loud. When I opened the kitchen door, Alice was at the table with a tablet and a bowl of untouched oatmeal. She looked genuinely startled to see me. "Good morning," I said. "I'll be taking my breakfast out." "We were just about to bring," she began. "I know," I said, and crossed to the kettle like it was my house. I stood there while it boiled, watching the steam rise, and then I made tea the way Margaret had taught me, leaves first, water rolling. I buttered toast without asking where the butter lived. I put everything on a tray and headed for the garage. "Dad," Ron said, appearing in the doorway, hair damp, tie crooked. "You should have waited." "I've done a lot of waiting," I replied. "New policy. I'll keep you posted." I closed the garage door respectfully, not a slam, just a boundary. After breakfast, I wrote, "An eviction notice looks more frightening than it is. It's a letter with teeth." I drafted the first version by hand, then typed it on my old phone with its obstinate keyboard, line by careful line, the trust's name, the property address, the clause about material breach, neglect and endangerment of the settler, abuse, attempts to coerce guardianship, denial of reasonable accommodation, 30 days to vacate. Failure to comply will result in legal action and a restraining order if necessary. Signed, Liam Harcourt, trustee. I read it twice. I read it a third time. Then I set it aside and wrote another letter. This one short and human. Ron, I'm your father before I'm your landlord. I asked to be your guest and you made me a problem. You're not losing a home. You're losing the right to treat me like I don't deserve one. You can still choose better. I printed both at the library that afternoon, after my meeting at the bank and a quick stop at the notary. The clerk asked, "Do you want certified copies?" And I said, "Yes, please," and paid with a hand that didn't shake. On my way back, I bought a small thermos and a better space heater from the hardware store. The cashier offered to carry the box to the car. I said I had it, because I did. I slept that night with the new heater purring and the thermos of tea beside me, and for the first time since the hospital, I slept through to morning. When I woke, I washed, shaved, put on my good sweater, the one Margaret liked, because it made my eyes look kind, and tucked the papers into a manila envelope. At 9, when I heard the school run finish and the house quiet, I opened the door to the kitchen. Ron and Alice looked up together. For a second, I saw us as a photograph might. Me at the threshold, them at the table, the kettle starting to murmur, winter sun flattening everything into a single plane. It almost could have been a family scene. "Dad," Ron said. I set the envelope on the table. "Consider yourselves notified," I said, and my voice was calm in a way that surprised me. From today, everything changes. The garage smelled of oil, damp wood, and betrayal. I had been lying awake most nights, staring into the dark rafters, wondering just how much further my son and his wife could go. But that night, fate handed me something unexpected, a weapon. I found it while digging through the small box of my personal things, shoved into the corner under a dusty tarp. A sleek black smartwatch, still in its original packaging, tucked inside a gift bag with a childish "Love you" grandpa card from my granddaughter. I remembered the day she'd given it to me, months ago, before her parents moved me out here. I hadn't used it, technology, and I had an uneasy truce. But now, running my thumb over its smooth face, I realized it had one feature that made my pulse quicken: voice recording. My son and Alice liked to talk in the kitchen after dinner when they thought I was out of earshot. I'd heard enough snippets to know their concerns about my health were just smoke. The truth was uglier: my property, my savings, my life reduced to a transaction in their heads. And now I had a way to capture it all. That first night, I lay in the dark, listening through the thin garage wall. Their voices drifted in, sharp and careless. The old man stubborn, Alice's voice, cold as a blade. "We just have to be patient," Ron muttered. "Once he's not around anymore, everything is ours." Or, she said slowly, we could accelerate things. You know what I mean. The words didn't sting the way I thought they would. I didn't cry. I didn't feel defeated. Instead, I felt something heavy and solid settle inside me resolve. I tapped the watch face, its red light blinking softly in the shadows. Every word was being stored, every plan, every slip of their tongues. The garage became more than my prison, it was my war room. Each night, I recorded. Whispered arguments about not wasting another year feeding him. Conversations about avoiding the cost of care. Even laughter about the inconvenience of having to walk food out to the garage like he's some stray cat. They thought they were clever. They thought their cruelty was hidden behind polite smiles and forced dinners. But with each recording, I was building something they couldn't see: a wall of proof, brick by damning brick. One evening, Alice said, "We'll tell him it's for his own good. He's too old to argue." I smiled in the dark, pressing the watch against my wrist. "Try me," I whispered. By the end of the week, I had hours of their voices. Evidence enough to show anyone exactly what they were planning. But I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. No, this was only the opening move. And in this game, I wasn't going to be the one cornered. The garage no longer felt like the damp cell it had been when Ron first dragged my mattress out here. Now it was a staging ground. The watch lay on the workbench beside me, connected to my old laptop, each audio file neatly labeled with date and time. Still, I knew raw recordings wouldn't be enough. If I wanted to move from defense to attack, I'd need someone with both the legal teeth and the moral backbone to swing them. That's when I thought of Harold Bennett. We'd worked together decades ago, when I was a postal inspector and he was a young assistant DA cutting his teeth on mail fraud cases. Harold had gone on to the bench, a judge with a reputation for patience and a taste for justice that wasn't just theoretical. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I called, he picked up on the second ring. "Liam Harcourt," he said, his voice warm but curious. "If you're calling me, it's either a wedding or a war." "It's war," I said simply. I told him the whole thing, starting with the garage, the cold meals, and ending with the word accelerated burned into my memory. I mentioned the recordings, the attempts to manipulate guardianship, the isolation. He didn't interrupt, just let the silence stretch, absorbing it. Finally, he said, "I can't take this directly, you know the ethics rules, but I can give you a name. Alexander Kovalenko. Elder law, financial abuse, estate protection." Sharp as they come, and not afraid of a fight. Alexander called me the next morning. His voice was calm, deliberate, with the faintest Ukrainian accent. "Judge Bennett speaks highly of you. He says you're not just looking to survive this, you're looking to win. That I can work with." We met in his office that afternoon. The man was younger than I expected, mid-40s, lean, eyes like polished steel. He didn't waste time on pity. "I've read your trust agreement," he said, tapping a copy on his desk. "Your son has no current ownership rights. But if they get guardianship, that changes. So we prevent it. We also address the abuse." We worked through the afternoon like generals mapping a campaign. Lawsuit 1. Petition to court for injunction against any financial actions on my behalf, without my direct, in-person consent. Lawsuit 2. Motion to remove Ron as successor trustee from the Harcourt Family Trust, citing abuse, coercion, and conflict of interest. Lawsuit 3. Civil claim for elder financial exploitation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, with the recordings and photographs as exhibits. Alexander listened to the audio, jotting down timestamps like a composer marking a score. "This," he said, playing Alice's casual, accelerated line again, "is not just ugly, it's legally useful. And the isolation, food in the garage, exclusion from meals, yes, we can prove neglect." By the time we were done, the stack of documents on the table was thick enough to cast a shadow. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't dared hope for: control. Leaving his office, I realized my gait had changed. I wasn't shuffling, I was walking with purpose. The November air bit at my cheeks, but it didn't feel cold. Back in the garage that night, I looked at the thin mattress, the boxes, the space heater. The place hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't a victim lying in the dark anymore. I was a strategist, and the board was set. Morning came pale and sharp, the kind of light that seems to scrape frost off the air. I'd been awake since before dawn, my clothes laid out, my envelope sealed. The papers inside were thick, every word drafted with Alexander's precision, every exhibit numbered, every accusation supported by proof that could survive any courtroom. At 8 o'clock sharp, I opened the garage door. The cold hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. My cane tapped once on the driveway before I stepped into the house. No knocking, no waiting for permission. This was my house, and I was done behaving like a trespasser. Ron was at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, hair still damp from the shower. Alice sat opposite him, a bowl of cereal untouched, her robe tied in a neat bow. She looked up first, startled. "Dad? We were going to bring you." I set the envelope down in the middle of the table. "This," I said, "is from the court. You'll both want to read it carefully." Ron frowned, pulling the stack of papers free. His eyes moved over the words, his expression hardening with each page. "An injunction? Removal from the trust? You're suing us." "I'm protecting myself," I said evenly. "And my home." Alice snatched a page, scanning it. You can't just. You'll also find a restraining clause, I interrupted, prohibiting either of you from making financial or legal decisions for me. And the recordings are on file with the court. If you challenge this, they'll be played in open session. A knock at the back door cut the air. A uniformed officer stepped inside, cap in hand. Mr. Harcourt? Yes. I've been asked to inform these two, he nodded toward Ron and Alice, that they have 24 hours to vacate the premises. This order is enforceable. I'll be back tomorrow morning to confirm compliance. Alice's mouth fell open. 24 hours? That's impossible. It's the law, the officer said simply. And considering the circumstances, you're lucky you weren't removed today. Ron looked at me then, really looked. Dad, you'll be lonely. His voice cracked slightly, but I didn't mistake it for love. It was the sound of someone who's just lost the game and knows it. I shook my head. I've been lonely since the moment you locked me in the garage. The officer stayed just long enough to see them start packing. Alice slammed drawers. Ron muttered under his breath. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I simply watched as they carried their things, boxes, suitcases, all the pieces of their takeover, out the front door. By noon the house was quiet. By 3, empty. I walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once stood at the threshold, unwelcome. I put the kettle on. The whistle filled the room like an announcement. I poured the tea into Margaret's old mug, the one Alice had tried to box up for storage. Sitting at the table, I let the warmth of the cup sink into my hands. Outside, the pale light had softened, and the shadows in the corners of the house felt different now, less like threats, more like old friends returning. For the first time in months, the house was mine again. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt at home. The first week after Ron and Alice left was quiet, blissfully so. I moved from room to room without glancing over my shoulder. The air felt different, warmer somehow, even before I fixed the draft under the kitchen door. Then the letters started arriving. The first one was short, almost sweet. Dad, we're worried about you. The garage wasn't meant to hurt you. You've been confused since the stroke, and we only wanted to help. 2 days later came another, longer. You're remembering things wrong. No one locked you away. We were giving you space to rest. Maybe your mind is mixing things up. It happens after these kinds of health scares. Phone calls followed. I let them ring, but the voicemail filled with the same syrupy poison. Dad, I think you're forgetting what really happened. We just want to see you, if you could admit you're mistaken. Maybe talk to a doctor about your memory. It was the oldest trick in the book, gaslighting. They wanted me to doubt my own eyes, my own ears, my own watch full of recordings. They wanted me to believe their version, the one where the garage was a gift and their greed was care. But I didn't live in that version anymore. My granddaughter, bless her, came by one Saturday with a bag of groceries and her easy laugh. They're trying to make you feel crazy, she said, slicing bread in my kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. You're not. You were there. I believe you. And so will anyone else who hears what you recorded. It was such a simple thing to be believed, yet it studied me more than any lawyer's assurance. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with their letters in a neat pile. I read each one once more, not to absorb the lies, but to remind myself exactly what I was discarding. Then I carried them out to the back garden, lit a match, and dropped it into the metal fire pit. The paper curled and blackened, their careful handwriting dissolving into ash. Smoke rose into the cold night air, carrying the last of their false concern with it. I stood there until the fire died to embers, the smell of burnt paper clinging to my sweater. When I went back inside, the house felt lighter. The influence they had tried to claw back was gone, burned, scattered, and finished. I locked the door, made myself tea, and sat in the quiet, knowing they could knock all they wanted. They would never be let in again. The house had settled into its own rhythm in the weeks after Ron and Alice left. The creaks in the floorboards sounded like old friends greeting me when I walked down the hallway. The ticking of the mantel clock no longer felt oppressive. It was simply the heartbeat of the home again. Even the silence at night had changed, no longer the cold absence of company, but a space where I could think, remember, and breathe. I had started keeping the curtains open during the day, letting the winter sun spill into the rooms. The light would catch the dust in the air, turning it into a slow snowstorm of gold, and I would sit at the kitchen table with tea, watching it move. It was a small, private kind of peace, the kind that feels fragile, as if too much noise could shatter it. That morning, the peace came with a knock on the door. It wasn't the quick rap of a neighbor or the sharp fist of someone impatient. It was deliberate, measured, 3 solid knocks, a pause, then 2 more. When I opened the door, there was the postman, cap low against the cold wind, a clipboard in one hand and a thick white envelope in the other. "Registered letter for you, Mr. Harcourt," he said, offering the pen for my signature. From a Martha Klein. The name made me straighten. Martha had been part of my life for decades, long before Ron's temporary arrangement had exiled me to the garage. She'd sung alto in the choir, organized every food drive, and kept the pastor on his toes during council meetings. If Martha was writing, it was because something mattered. I signed, thanked him, and brought the envelope inside. The handwriting was Martha's, neat, looping with the steady discipline of someone who had been taught to write with pride. I used the old bone-handled knife to slit it open, careful not to tear the paper inside. The letter was on church stationery, the cross and oak leaves printed faintly in the header. I unfolded it and began to read. "Liam, I thought you should hear this from me before the news finds you through gossip. Last week, the church council met in full session. We reviewed the accounts of your situation, the garage, the recordings, the court findings. After prayer, discussion, and the pastor's agreement, we voted unanimously to remove Ron from our membership rolls. His actions toward you, his own father, were in violation of our covenant. This is not punishment for punishment's sake, it is accountability. You will always have a place among us. Many here are ashamed they did not intervene sooner. The congregation stands with you now, and we will not pretend otherwise. Yours in truth, Martha." I read it twice before setting it down on the table. The kettle hadn't even begun to sing yet, but there was a slow warmth rising in me. Not joy exactly, but something heavier, deeper. In our town, being removed from the church rolls wasn't just losing a pew on Sunday mornings. It was a public reckoning. It meant people noticed when you were gone, and they knew why. It meant the community saw your actions not as a private quarrel, but as something that violated the moral code they all agreed to live by. I was still absorbing that when the phone rang. It was my granddaughter, her voice quick but careful. "Grandpa, I've got news. Not sure how you'll take it." "Go on," I said. "It's Mom. She lost custody of Grace." I sat back in my chair. "What happened?" "She missed hearings, failed the home inspections, and, well, the court called it neglect. Grace is staying with Aunt Eva now. She's actually doing better. School's good, she's eating right. But it's official, Mom can't have her back without months of review." I was quiet for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Alice, polished, sharp, controlled, had always treated authority like something she wielded, never something that could be turned on her. To lose custody of her own daughter must have been unthinkable to her. And yet here it was, real and on record. "I see," I said finally. It would have been easy to feel a flicker of triumph, to think they've finally been brought low. But that wasn't the truth of what settled in my chest. The truth was I hadn't destroyed them. I hadn't set out to ruin Ron's place in the community or take Alice's child away. All I had done finally, after years, was stop protecting them from themselves. For so long, I'd been the buffer. I'd made excuses for Ron's selfishness. He's just under stress. I tolerated Alice's coldness. That's just her way. Even when Margaret was alive, we'd smoothed over the cracks in the name of family harmony. And they'd learned that as long as I was there, they could keep stepping out of line without ever really falling. But when they locked me in that garage, when they left my meals at the door, when I heard Alice talk about accelerating my death, I stopped being their shield. I let the world see them as they really were. The church's vote. The custody ruling. None of it had been my hand forcing justice. It had been the natural consequence of truth left uncovered. I poured the tea and carried it into the front room. The winter sun had begun to pour through the window, lighting up the dust in the air until it looked like gold drifting in slow motion. Margaret would have understood this feeling. Not revenge, never revenge. Just the deep, steadying knowledge that the scales had tipped back toward balance, that the damage had been acknowledged and those who had caused it were being made to face it. I sat there with the mug warm in my hands, thinking of Martha's line, "This is not punishment for punishment's sake, it is accountability." The words fit. The war was over. What remained was to live, not as a man who had won, but as a man who no longer had to fight for the right to exist in his own home. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough dot on paper, the war was over. The court had given me back my house, my independence, and my reputation. Ron and Alice were barred from making any financial or legal decisions on my behalf. Their names were nowhere near my deed. The law had spoken, and it had spoken in my favor. But paper victories are fragile things in a small town. I learned that the first week after the ruling. At the grocery store, I was picking out apples when I caught two women from church watching me from the end of the aisle. When my eyes met theirs, they turned away abruptly, whispering into each other's hair. At the post office, a man I'd known for 20 years gave me a nod, but his face carried a polite strain, as if he was unsure whether to believe the things he'd heard. Even at church, though my welcome back was warm, I saw it, those tiny, darting glances exchanged when my name was mentioned. They were wondering, was the court's version the truth? Or was I, as Ron and Alice had suggested to some, confused after the stroke? One evening, I sat across from Eva at the kitchen table. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes on me. "You know," she said, "some people still don't understand what happened. They've heard bits and pieces, filled in the rest with their own imagination." "That's how gossip works," I said. "You give it an inch and it builds a mile." She gave me a measured look. "If you want the record straight in the community, you might have to do it yourself." It was my granddaughter who made it more than talk. She came over on a Saturday morning, dropped her backpack on the floor, and set her phone on the table like she was laying down a weapon. "Grandpa," she said, "you've got the truth. And you've got the recordings, right? The same ones they played in court." "Yes," I said cautiously. "Then let's show people. A video, your voice, your story, plus some of the recordings. People believe what they see and hear from the source. Right now they're hearing your story through other people's mouths. Let's take that away from them." I hesitated. It feels like airing dirty laundry. "It's not laundry," she said flatly. "It's evidence. They lied about you in public, said your memory was failing, said you imagined it. This is a revenge. It's putting the truth where everyone can see it. That's the only way rumor dies." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the garage, the thin mattress, the way the cold had crept up from the concrete into my bones, the silent dinners left like offerings to a dog. And I realized she was right. My silence had been their shield once. I wasn't going to give it to them again. Recording the truth, we set up the following Sunday afternoon in the front room. The winter light poured through the big window, the kind of golden light that made even old furniture look dignified. My granddaughter balanced her phone on a stack of books to get the right height. Eva sat off to the side, acting as a quiet audience. When the little red light blinked, I began. I didn't dramatize. I didn't raise my voice. I told the truth as it had happened, how Ron had promised me a room in the house when I came from the hospital, but put me in the garage instead. The concrete floor, the mice, the heater too small to keep away the cold. The food left at the door without a word. The night I overheard Alice talk about accelerating my death. The watch my granddaughter had given me, and how I had used it to record their words. The day in court when the evidence was finally heard. Between my words, we inserted short clips from the recordings. Once he's gone, it's all ours. Ron's voice, quiet but cutting. We could accelerate things, Alice's voice, calm, almost bored. When I was done, I looked into the camera and said, slowly, "If you think silence protects you, it doesn't. It only protects the one hurting you." The release that night, we uploaded the video to Facebook, YouTube, and the town's community group. My granddaughter added a simple description, the truth from my grandfather in his own words. By morning, the video had already been shared 50 times. By lunchtime, 200. By the end of the day, nearly 1,000. Messages began flooding in. "We're so sorry, Liam. I didn't know it was like that. You're brave to tell it. My uncle went through something similar. Thank you for speaking up. Some were from people I hadn't spoken to in decades. Others were strangers from towns I'd never visited, saying the story made them feel less alone in their own struggles. The pushback Ron and Alice tried to react the way they always had, through intimidation. Their lawyer sent a letter claiming the video was defamatory and that the recordings had been taken out of context. I called Alexander, my lawyer. He listened, then chuckled softly. Every clip you used was already entered into the public court record. That means they're not only legal to use, they're officially recognized as truthful. They can send all the letters they like, they have no case. And he was right. Within 2 weeks, the threats stopped. Their silence was louder than their accusations had ever been. The shift in the community was slow but real. At the market, people who once looked away now stopped to talk. At the post office, the man who'd nodded stiffly before now clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Saw your video, Liam. Proud of you." At church, the glances were gone, replaced with steady eyes and genuine welcomes. It wasn't about being liked. It was about truth finally moving faster than rumor. For the first time since this began, I felt like I'd reclaimed not just my home, but my name. And this time, it wasn't the court that gave it to me. It was my own voice. Spring that year arrived like an uninvited guest who nonetheless brought flowers. The frost began to pull back from the earth, retreating in silver sheets. The lake thawed in slow motion, the ice cracking along long, jagged seams. I hadn't been to the lake house in years, too many memories, too much of Margaret there. But one bright April morning, I found myself driving the familiar road, the tires humming over the same curves and bends I'd traveled 100 times before. The gravel drive was scattered with winter's leftovers, broken branches, pine needles, brittle leaves that crumbled underfoot. The paint on the siding had blistered and curled, the shutters hung at odd angles, and the dock leaned toward the water like a man trying to hear something far away. Still, I could see past the years. I saw Margaret on the porch, a book in her lap. I saw our granddaughter running barefoot in the grass, her hair wild in the summer air. This place had been the center of our joy once. Now it felt like a patient waiting for a diagnosis. A purpose finds me after the video had gone out. The letters began arriving, first 1 or 2 a week, then a dozen, then more. People from all over the country, men and women in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, wrote to me about their own stories. Some had been tricked out of savings. Others had been shut away in back rooms, told they were confused or too much trouble. A few had been forced into care facilities against their will so relatives could sell their homes. The details varied, but the theme was the same. I thought I was alone until I saw your story. Eva read one letter aloud one evening. A woman named Clara wrote, "I stopped speaking up years ago because no one listened. Watching you talk, it made me remember I still have a voice." Eva looked up at me. "You've been given your voice back, Liam. Maybe it's time to help others find theirs." That phrase wouldn't leave me. It followed me into my walks, into my sleep. The birth of the fund within 2 weeks, the name came to me, Second Voice. A fund and network for elderly people who had been financially or emotionally abused. We would offer 3 things: legal help, emergency housing, and a community of witnesses, people who would show up for those abandoned by their own. The lake house would be its center. I threw myself into restoring it, not as a retreat for me, but as a sanctuary for others. The dock was rebuilt with weathered planks that smelled faintly of cedar. The siding got 2 fresh coats of paint the color of warm cream. Inside, I replaced the sagging furniture with sturdy, comfortable pieces. In the kitchen, I put in a long table long enough for a dozen people to sit and speak without raising their voices. Every choice was deliberate. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a statement. You are safe here. Your story matters here. First Lives changed the first people we helped lived just 3 towns over. Mrs. O'Hara, a retired teacher, had trusted her son to manage her bills. He drained her account within months, leaving her to discover the truth only when her electricity was cut off. Then came George, a widower whose niece had moved in to help, only to keep him locked in a small back bedroom. She told the neighbors he was senile so they wouldn't check on him. In both cases, we worked with lawyers to free them, restoring Mrs. O'Hara's control over her finances and securing a safe home for George. When they came to the lake house for the first annual Second Voice gathering, I saw something in their faces I recognized from my own reflection months earlier, the quiet relief of being heard and believed. Around the long table, they told their stories. Not just the pain, but the recovery, what it felt like to have someone stand beside them. I realized then that Second Voice was more than a fund. It was a bridge back to dignity. A family for the house that autumn, the Alamov family arrived in our town. They were refugees from a war that had left their home city in ruins. They had little in the way of possessions, but what they carried in spirit was wealth, an unshakable sense of family. I met them through a local refugee support group. I watched the way the grandchildren cared for their grandmother, pulling out her chair before meals, asking her opinion before making decisions, kissing her hand before bedtime. It struck me that the lake house needed that kind of respect and warmth. One evening, as the sky turned pink over the water, I told them I wanted them to have it. They protested, saying they could never repay me. "This isn't about repayment," I said. "It's about making sure the house lives. It's seen enough neglect. It deserves a family that honors the old and teaches the young why it matters." A house reborn the day they moved in, the place transformed overnight. Curtains were drawn back to let the light in, the air filled with the smell of cooking spices I couldn't name, but instantly loved. The grandmother hummed as she stirred a pot. Laughter bounced off the walls in a way I hadn't heard there in years. Standing on the porch, watching them, I realized the house was no longer a museum to my past. It had become a living thing again. The Mission Continues Second Voice kept growing. We partnered with elder advocacy groups, added a hotline, and recruited volunteer lawyers willing to take cases pro bono. Every month brought more stories, more rescues. Each one confirmed what I already knew. Abuse thrives in silence, and the only antidote is light. I'd gone to the lake house that April thinking I might save it. Instead, it had helped save me by showing me that the worst chapters in life can still be rewritten into something worth passing on. And now, as the sun set over the lake and the Alamov's laughter spilled through the open windows, I knew I'd given the house away at exactly the right time, when it could do the most good. A full year has passed since the court ended it. 1 year since the gavel came down, since I walked out into the pale spring sunlight with the papers in my hand and the knowledge that the house, my name, and my autonomy were once again mine. The seasons have each taken their turn through the windows of this home. The summer light warmed the kitchen where I once ate alone in silence. Autumn scattered gold leaves across the lawn I now mow at my own pace. Winter curled up around the house like a cat, and spring again has begun to lift the frost from the ground. A year is enough time for new routines to take root. I wake early still, but now by choice. I boil water for tea and sort through the day's mail, which is no longer bills and demands, but letters from strangers, allies, and survivors. Second Voice has grown larger than I could have imagined, 3 physical centers in 3 different towns, a 24-hour crisis hotline, and a volunteer roster that includes retired judges, lawyers, and community advocates. Some mornings, I walk into the office and find the walls plastered with thank you notes from people we've helped. A retired nurse who regained control of her pension after her nephew emptied her account. A man who escaped a care facility where he had been placed against his will. A widow who reclaimed her house after her son tried to sell it from under her. These walls tell more stories than I ever could. A ritual for myself on the anniversary of the ruling, I decided to give myself a private task. Not for the public, not for the fund, not for the website. For me alone. I cleared the surface of my desk, set down 2 thick sheets of cream paper, and uncapped a pen that had belonged to Margaret. 1 page for Ron, 1 for Alice. I didn't write in haste or anger. I wrote slowly, the way one might lay bricks to build a wall, not to keep something out, but to mark a clear boundary. To Ron, I began with the truth I'd never said out loud to him. You were my son before you were my betrayer. I told him I remembered the boy who once built a fort in the living room, who used to run to me when he skinned his knee. I told him I also remembered the man who looked at me in the garage and saw only an inconvenience. I wrote about the way his voice sounded in the recordings, about the cold practicality of once he's gone. It's all ours. To Alice, I began with gratitude that had long since turned to ash. I welcomed you into my family because I believed you would protect it. I told her about the night I heard her suggest accelerating my death, about how those words severed the last fragile thread of trust. I told her I understood she would probably always see herself as the wronged party, but that my memory of her would never change. I ended both letters with the same line, I have spoken my truth. Whether you hear it or not is no longer my concern. When I finished, I folded the pages neatly, slid them into envelopes, and wrote their names in steady script. I placed them in the top drawer of my desk, under a small box of paper clips. They will never be sent. These letters were never meant to reach their hands. They were meant to empty something heavy from mine. Forgiveness and its limits. People ask about forgiveness more often than you might think. Sometimes they ask in whispers, as though speaking too loud might shatter my resolve. Have you forgiven them? I think people want a neat ending, the sort that lets them close the book with a sigh and say, see? Everything works out in the end. But my ending is not that. I have not forgiven them. And I am not ashamed to say so. Forgiveness has its place, but it is not the inevitable final chapter. It is not a prize you win for surviving. And it is certainly not a debt owed to the people who caused the harm. What I have done is refuse bitterness. I will not let their actions occupy my days. I have seen too many people drink the poison of resentment and expect the other person to die. I won't drink it. I choose my own peace instead. The work grows in the 12 months since that verdict. Second Voice has expanded in ways I didn't expect. We now run community workshops to teach elders how to protect themselves legally before abuse begins. We've created an emergency fund to pay for locks to be changed, utilities to be restored, and transportation for those fleeing unsafe situations. The hotline rings day and night, answered by people who know how to listen without judgment. Every rescued voice adds strength to the next. Eva runs the main office now, my granddaughter manages the public outreach, and I visit each center at least once a month. When I walk through those doors and see a new face, someone who arrived frightened, unsure, and is now standing tall again, I feel the kind of pride that has nothing to do with myself and everything to do with what we've built. My final word, if there's one thing this year has taught me, it's that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is a weapon kept sheathed until the moment it must be drawn. Silence can protect you long enough to make your move, but silence must never become surrender. Your memory is your record. Your dignity is your armor. Guard them with everything you have. And when the time comes, pass them down to someone who needs to know they are not alone. I began this story in a cold garage. My meals passed through a door without a word. I end it here, in my study, the late spring light spilling through the window, my name my own, my work alive and growing. I will never give Ron or Alice forgiveness, but I will give the truth again and again until my last breath. Because truth, I have learned, is enough to keep the light burning for someone else who is still in the dark.